What's something that you heard a lot before you actually listened to it? You know what I'm saying? Like that advice that your parents gave you when you were a kid and you were like, yeah, in ear, one out the other ear. And then you get to be like 30 years old and you're like, dang, right? And then you start to listen and to remember. Something like that. Something that you heard a lot before you actually listened to it. I'll give you 8 seconds to think about it and be particularly brilliant on this fine Easter morning. I see some confused faces. Come on, Bluewater. All right, go. Lauren's got one. It's actually a good idea to hang out with Jesus every day. Who knew? Who knew? That actually is sort of a life-formative thing. What you got, Bri? Rest. This church rests really well because in the middle of every sermon, half of you are nodded off. But rest is one of the practical pieces of advice. It's one of the big 10 commandments, but some of us just don't know enough to relax and rest and be still. That's true. Who else? Got one. Who's that? Kira in the back. It's not about you. Yeah. Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. It's provocative and it touches so many things. What you got, Ken? Jesus loves you. Yeah. I mean, it's like that's one of those things to which you respond, yeah, but the older you get, the more you realize how just fundamental it is to get a firm grip on something so simple as that. There was a hand over here. Yes, sir. There are no shortcuts in life. Yeah, you usually listen to that after you've tried 8 or 10 shortcuts in life, right? I'm with you there. Who else? Yeah, Vern? Be careful or it's going to hurt later. Yeah. You don't have to learn every lesson yourself. Sometimes you can just trust the good advice that you get and avoid the trouble, right? Don't touch the stove. Yeah. Kaika in the back. Be careful who you hang out with. Yeah. Oh, it's the proverb, bad company corrupts good character. Yeah, good practical advice. Who else? A couple more. These are great. Whose hand is that? Antonio's? Eye of the Tiger, Rocky 3 by Survivor. Like, you heard it in the soundtrack, but then when you stop and listen, you realize that's a life-changing song. Yeah. Read the lyrics out loud liturgically. We should have you do that one Sunday. Antonio presents Eye of the Tiger. I'd come to that. I would totally come to that. Yeah, you listen to it a lot. It's like, oh, it's a Rocky movie. But they're like, no, man. There's some gospel truth in that song. Sure. Why not? All right, who else? Yeah, Beth. Beth's got the best one, I know. If you don't want to slip, stay out of the slippery place. Don't flirt with trouble. Yeah, that's a good one. There was one more hand back here. Who was it? Who's that? Oh, Natalie. Take care of yourself. Simple things, right? And maybe that's part of the trouble, is that they sound simple and they sound ordinary, and so we don't really attach importance to them right away until such a time where we realize, oh, no, that's actually a thing. That's actually bigger. That's actually fundamental. That's actually life-changing. My dad, as I was growing up, was not a believer. He's kind of a rough and tumble guy. We had kind of a rough and tumble family. So for years and years, I was like the only Christian in my family, and I would have to make my own way to church and stuff like that. And sometimes it caused conflicts, and I always kind of felt awkward about it at home. And then I remember as I was getting late into my high school career, and I was trying to get to college, and you start thinking about what you're going to do with your life. And I remember sitting at the table one night thinking about talking to Dad about things that I was applying for and maybe what I wanted to be. I was writing some of those application essays for college. You guys remember those of you who did them? And Dad said, Jode, you call me Jody, have you ever considered being a pastor? I think you'd be, he said clergy, I think you'd be good in the clergy. And coming from him, that was bizarre, right? Because he was like super practical, like super, kind of money-based and stuff like that. He wanted me to have a good career. And so for him to say, maybe you should consider a life of ministry in the church was like, it was almost apostasy for him, for him to say something like that. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, it's kind of a big thing in your life. And then after a few seconds of sober consideration, I said, no way. I do not want to do that. I want to do something significant with my life. And I utterly dismissed it out of hand. Utterly dismissed it. Not the least bit attractive to me. And then I went off and I did other things and pursued other careers for a while, at least 2 other major careers, before I started doing ministry full-time. Dad knew something. And we have that experience sometimes. We get older and we think, our parents know what they're talking about. Sometimes it takes us till age 30 to start to realize these things. In that case, it was something I perhaps should have listened to because it was so uncharacteristic of my father's worldview. I want to read the Easter story today. Believe it or not, that relates a little bit. I'm going to read the version of the story from Luke 24. Luke was not one of the original followers of Jesus. He was he was a Greek physician, a very learned man who took upon himself a journalistic project because he had met Paul and some of the early believers. So he wrote down a little booklet of their testimonies and called it the Gospel of Luke. He was trying to be historically accurate. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. So what had happened is that Jesus was killed on a short timeline. They did this sham trial. Some people had conspired against him. And then they had to hurry to get him killed before the Sabbath fell. And you had to get the guy into the grave before sundown on Friday. Otherwise, it was a violation of Jewish custom. And so his friends and loved ones, the people that cared most for him, did not have time to take his body and prepare it properly for burial. It was not properly embalmed. It was not anointed with spice and all of that stuff. And so these women who had been following him for years got up early on Sunday morning, and they were going to go to the tomb and beg their way past the Roman guards and properly anoint Jesus' burial, Jesus' body for burial, so that he could rest in peace. That's what's going on here. They're trying to make up for what they had missed. But they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. It would have been a stone tomb sealed with a huge boulder that would have taken, 3 or 4 men to move. I think they were going to try and talk the soldiers into helping them roll it away. But when they got there, the tomb is open. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. Big moment in human history, everybody. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen." There you go. Remember how he told you. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. In other words, way back at the beginning, he was saying this. The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again. He did say this to them several times. We have it recorded. Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11. Now it's the 11 because Judas has abandoned them and may well be dead at this point. They told these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. Only the women had gone out. Why? Well, because the male disciples were afraid that if they went out, they would be arrested as conspirators and murdered. Romans didn't crucify ladies. So the men were hunkering behind doors in fear, while the women were doing the serious business. But they did not believe the women because, right, guys? Because their words seemed to them like nonsense. I'm not listening. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves. This would have been like the burial shroud that was common. And he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. So Peter goes and checks it out. We're told in the Gospel of John that John accompanies him as well. Familiar story at this point, right? And the story is why you guys are here in church. I like this version because it has this quality of you heard, but you didn't listen, y'all. And the angels come, and their bodies are glowing in light, right? They have this transcendent quality to them, and the women are freaked out at first. And then these angels speak to them. And I just want to underscore that the angels spoke to them sarcastically, because sarcasm is incredibly spiritually powerful, people. I just want to underscore that in this story. They're freaked about the angels, and the angels, these glowing men, said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Well, that's kind of funny. That's a sarcastic thing to say. "He's not here, he's risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee that the Son of Man will be killed and raised on the third day?" And then they remembered his words. And these guys probably said this with a little tone. It's like, come on, guys. Duh. What's your problem? However, angels do that. And then they came back and told the apostles what had happened. It's like, he did tell us that he was going to raise from the dead after 3 days in the tomb. In fact, he had said it several times just during the week previous, and during Passion Week. So the women were reminded that they had known this all along. They just didn't really get it, right? They had heard it, but they didn't really ascribe to it the importance, the vitality, the applicability, right? It's like they put it in that file that we all have in our brains, the file that says maybe later, or kind of important, but not really, that thing that kind of suspends application of something that we heard. But now they're confronted with a decision. It's like, well, maybe this is actually more important than I thought it was, right? Maybe I should have incorporated this all along. And then the women tell the male disciples, and they react the same way. They had all heard it, in fact, probably more often than the women. Some of the women were late joiners. Mary Magdalene was earlier. Joanna is mentioned. She was the wife of the manager of Herod's household. So she was the wife of a super important government bureaucrat. She was probably really wealthy, but might not have started following Jesus until they got close to Jerusalem. Interesting ladies. But the guys were like, I hear you say that, but I don't think so. Except for Peter. We find out John 1 as well. And he's like, well, I'm at least going to check it out. Peter decided to be a seeker at that point. So he goes to the tomb, and he examines it for himself. And he gets there, and it's open, and he runs in, and all it says is that he examined the cloths. For whatever reason, the shroud was important, and Peter's examining it. The shroud actually features even more in the John version of the story. So Peter reached the tomb. John reached the tomb first, and then Peter. John goes in. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not even go into the tomb. And then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head, the cloth that was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. There's all this stuff about the cloth. There's something about the cloth that was really convincing to them. Have you guys heard of this thing called the Shroud of Turin? Yeah. So traditionally, it's the burial cloth of Jesus that has been preserved, passed down from one generation of believer to another for 2,000 years. And it eventually, legend has it that it traveled all around the Mediterranean, wherever the Christian church went, and then ended up in Italy and Western Europe. It is kept in a cathedral monastery in Turin now. And the Catholic Church has claimed for centuries that it's the actual burial shroud of Jesus. I remember in the 80s, they did some scientific testing on it, and they declared, oh, well, it's a fake. It's a fake because we found paint on it. And the implication was we have painted this image. A couple scientists examined it. And then it kind of got popular for scientists to examine it. It is, by some arguments now, the most scientifically examined object in human history. Most scientifically examined artifact, I should say. It has been subject to at least 102 academic studies, including a lot recently, that in my opinion have proved without a shadow of a doubt that this thing is actually authentic. We actually have the linen. And the reason it was preserved is indicated by the gospel stories, because it arrested the disciples' attention from the beginning. They're just strips of cloth. Why would it be so important? But it keeps getting mentioned. And the reason it's so important because it has on it an image of a man who, for all the world, looks like he's been crucified. And so they've examined this image. I have a couple of photos, actually. That's the image that's on the shroud. The shroud is linen, so it's the light-colored image. But it's an image in negative. It's like looking at a photo negative, those of you who are old enough to remember photo negatives. And so if you then shine a light through it, it comes out and the positive image, and it shows you kind of the face of this guy who was crucified. The burial shroud is 14 feet long, and it would have been wrapped around the person from head to toe and back up like that. Not this way, not like an Egyptian mummy, but like this. And so it shows the whole body and all the details. Somewhere along the line, somebody decorated it with paint, and that's what the early tests found. But as science got more sophisticated, they did things like they examined the age of the flax linen itself, and through isotope analysis determined that it was produced, this linen, this flax was grown in the Middle East around the turn of the millennium, around 30 AD or something like that, right when Jesus would have been killed. So now they've dated it properly, and they know that whatever this is, this artifact is 2,000 years old. So that's cool. The interesting thing is nobody knows how this image was produced. And nobody 2,000 years ago understood what a photonegative was. So if they were trying to produce an image, they would not have done it in negative. Sometimes it's called bas relief in sculpture. And so it's anachronistic, if you know what that word is. It's out of time. Why, if they were going to fake the artifact, why would they fake it in a way that would only make sense to people come the 19th, 20th century? So that's really curious. Another thing about that image is it's not a 3D image made 2D. Like when people paint things, the whole idea of painting things in 2D is that you shorten some lines and lengthen some lines to make a 2D object look like it's 3D. If you don't do that, you just take a 3D object and you crush it down flat. It looks like a child's drawing. But if you do that intentionally, you get what's called a hologram. You get information in 2D that can be projected into 3D. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining this to the scientifically challenged. But that's a hologram, which means the image contains information that can be amplified to 3D and give you a hyper-realistic model of whoever that was. And of course, nobody in the first century AD knew what holograms were. But there you go. Holograms are, they came around much later when we started experimenting with light and lasers and things like that. Surface analysis of the fibers indicate that the image was not produced by any way we know. It was not produced, the fibers are sort of toasted in a way, but it was not produced by flame because there's no burning, there's no indication of contact. Science has concluded that whatever that image is, it was produced by light, some sort of burst of light in a way that we can't even produce. It's because the image exists on the surface of the fiber, but not underneath it, so nothing's soaked into the linen fibers. A little complicated. You can read about all this stuff or go on YouTube if you want to take a deep dive. And so we do not understand how it was produced even today. So it would have been hard for somebody to fake in the first century AD. More than that, the image was produced by a body-shaped light, which would be really hard for us to produce today. It wasn't something that was shown onto the linen. The linen was wrapped in a circle, and whatever produced the image was in the middle of it. It's like the contents of a burrito becoming light and imprinting themselves on the outside of a burrito. I'm sorry if the science is getting too complicated now. But a light source that was so powerful it could stain cloth, that was compact enough to be wrapped in a burrito and shown from the middle outward. We can't do that today. We don't have the technology to do it today. But something like that happened. But recent analysis, and this is why it's been much in the news lately, I'm sure some of you have seen it, it was a very microscopic MRI type analysis done by the International Institute for Advanced Studies of Space Representation Sciences. That's the name of it. They broke down the image at microscopic levels, so like one molecule layer, the next molecule layer, the next molecule layer. And what they found was that is not one image, but it is an image capture that lasted across a few moments of a body that was actually moving. So if you ever see old film and it's like a frame and then another frame and another, and every frame is slightly different, well, at the molecular level, there's like a frame and then another frame and another frame. How that was produced is beyond imagination, except that this might be the moment at which this body shone with light and began to stir. And just for a moment, it captured the moment of resurrection. Could not possibly have been faked. There's just no possible way that it is an inexplicable scientific historical artifact. Imprinted in light radiation that even we could not produce in a way that actually captured motion 2,000 years ago, before film was ever invented. So that's it. I mentioned that you could take all that information and produce a hyper-realistic 3D model. Wayne, that's it. And the details in this shroud are so precise that it shows nails where you would expect the nails. It showed coins with Roman engravings on the eyes. And it showed every wound. Because this guy, oddly, wasn't crucified in typical Roman fashion. He had evidently been whipped beforehand, and his body covered with wounds from a cat o' nine tails. The Romans had these whips that were really 9 whips at once, and they had little embedded nails in them, so they'd snap. And so he had hundreds of holes in his body. You could see that he's wrapped up like this because that's how it would have been in the shroud. But that's it. There are all sorts of 3D animations of the face and stuff. You could go online, but I thought that one was the most powerful. Obviously, the Semitic guy, obviously beaten to a pulp before he was ever crucified, which was not the custom. That's it, guys. When I talk to Christians about this, 'cause, I'm a science geek, I'm all in archaeology and all this stuff, and so I've been following the story, and it's just mind-boggling. You see atheists coming to Christ over this, but I talk to some Christians about it, and some of them dismiss it, which is interesting, because you don't have to believe that this is the trial. It really doesn't matter, does it, in the big scheme of things? But it's as if when Christians hear something like this sometimes, they react like, well, we're not supposed to have physical evidence of it. Like, it's not supposed to be that easily real. It's not supposed to be that here and now. And there's some sort of trigger in us sometimes that just want to keep things spiritual and distant. But when I read the Easter story, like from Luke 24, and I hear those sort of protests, I feel like saying, yeah, but he told you. It's like, I feel a little bit like I'm one of the disciples at the tomb, and I'm sort of looking at the physical evidence, and I'm like, what? I know he told us, but it's not like I really listened. You know what I mean? Like life after death, life after death, life after death, resurrection. You hear it so many times, right? But then you're kind of confronted with it physically, and you're like, but now it's true, though. It's like undeniably true. It's like you can't fake it true. That little leap between believing something and trusting something, that's what Easter is about, in my opinion. I think that's what all of the celebrations are about. And of course, I think the best evidence for the resurrection of Christ is not this linen cloth, this 2,000-year-old linen cloth, although it's really fascinating. The best evidence for the resurrection of Christ was what happened later in history, that these guys that found the empty tomb, these poor nobodies, unskilled, never had a military, never had any wealth, went out from that day and eventually changed the entire globe. Absolutely impossible. But we are all the physical reality of the truth of that. And 10 out of 11 of the remaining apostles were all killed like Jesus. But they did it anyway. They could not be stopped. Why? Because they were thoroughly convinced in the physical reality of resurrection. And countless thousands of Christian martyrs have taken it forward from there. So I think a good thing to ask ourselves on Easter is simply, something like this. So you've heard. What if you listened? It's like, yeah, resurrection, life after death. He is risen indeed. But what if you actually trusted that? Then how would you live? What would life be like? And that answer is going to be different for every one of us. But at the very least, it seems that you could say, well, it's going to change the way you live life and probably the way you approach death. But the way you live life is going to seem different. If you go from hearing it to actually listening to it with your being, then life is going to stop seeming so, so mundane. You're going to not feel the pressure of all the chores and the finances and the aggravations. What is big is going to start seeming small. And maybe for a lot of us, what we've thought of as small is going to seem really big. The only eternal thing that exists on this planet is the relationships that we have. It's the only thing that we're going to take with us past the grave, right? Are we making believers? Are we loving people and establishing loving relationships that are going to last us into eternity? How do we do that? If God is real, am I listening to him? Am I moving in his resurrection power? Am I a person of miracles? Because that's what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about a people defined by miracles. Or do we let details stop us? You know what I mean? It's like there's this change in perspective. And again, what I'm saying might not be new to you. You've probably heard it 1,000 times. Oh yes, live for eternity. Our troubles are momentary and light compared to the surpassing glory and riches that await us in Christ Jesus. You know, you've probably heard these things, but have you listened? And Easter to me is always just an occasion to listen, you know, and I look at the face of Christ on the shroud and think to myself, yeah, that really happened. That really happened. Do you ever do that? Do you ever go back to old photo albums of times that you know were important, but that are kind of getting fuzzy in your head, and you look at the photos, and you be like, yeah, that happened. We have a photo. As if to say, yeah, that happened. I mean, it's not a long yearbook, but it's an interesting photo. That really happened. Are you listening to God today? Because that is your privilege. That is your privilege. And I'm just here simply to testify to you. It's actually true. It's actual, it's real, and it's unavoidably important to everyone in the world. We are not here by accident. We are here due to reality. Not so real. Real. So Father God, I pray that on each person you would impress this morning the actuality and the reality, the physicality of God and the God of life, because resurrection is about life. I pray, Lord, that our mortal life would be transformed into immortal life. More and more, day to day, year to year, that this Easter we would be more transcendent than we've ever been in the past. That we would be free from the details of the world, released into the magnificence of the next world. Imagine yourself for a second walking into the tomb and thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is different. Imagine yourself walking into some situation of hopelessness in your life today. And finding there an image of Christ and thinking, wait a minute, I can look at this differently. Resurrection comes from death. God, who can make something out of nothing, can certainly breathe life into something that you think is dead.